Perfect. So thank you for joining me today, Jad.
Hey, pleasure to be on your podcast, or anti-podcast, I should say.
Exactly, the anti podcast. So let's go straight to the point. Can you share with our audience your background?
Yeah, so essentially what we do is we help results-driven organizations implement conversational AI on Microsoft Teams to essentially enable the digital workplace of the future.
On Microsoft Teams specifically?
Yep, Microsoft Teams specifically. We are very bullish
Okay.
around that ecosystem right now, especially sort of implementing line of business use cases. So business process automation and getting that surfaced on Microsoft Teams.
Why Microsoft Teams? Can you explain a little bit your your reasoning behind this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at sort of all the top incumbent vendors, you look at Amazon. Amazon is really going to own the sort of digital e-commerce space, right? You look at Google. Google seems to be tracking towards this notion of IoT and sort of ambient computing with Google Home and all of sort of the interacted devices. And also their knowledge graph getting surfaced with their pre-existing sort of Google search, right, on Google Assistant. With
Yeah.
Microsoft, what we have begun to see is ever since they sort of have, they've sort of taken back the Cortana capabilities, and they've begun to sort of create a focal point around internal business process automation around pretty much their entire ecosystem around conversational AI. So we're very bullish on this specific platform and stack. And then when you sort of think about messaging within the business space, right? Internal face messaging, and we saw this huge rise of Slack maybe like 2-3 years ago, right?
Exactly.
Now that has begun to level off, and Microsoft Teams has actually surpassed the amount of monthly active users. I think there's probably 40 million monthly active users, far surpassing Slack. Now, Microsoft Teams has the ecosystem of not only the adoption, they also have integrations across the entire ecosystem of apps like Dynamics, SharePoint, Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automation. And now if you add a bot layer onto Microsoft Teams, onto all those integrations that already exist within the ecosystem, you have something that's very, very powerful to deliver like almost instantaneous business value.
That's really interesting point here. So you're saying like you are more bullish on Microsoft Teams rather than Slack for internal conversational AI.
100%.
Wow, wow, very, very good topic here. So can you share maybe a recent bot project you guys have been working on Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So essentially right now, what we're beginning to see is, even very, very simple use cases with inside of businesses are becoming really valuable. So essentially I'll talk about this real quick. So essentially, if you think about any digital transformation strategy, a company, mid-market enterprise company has essentially executed probably within the last 5 to 10 years. Almost exclusively, they've been centered around customer experience, right? Companies have made very, very good customer experience, but what they have done is they've unfortunately neglected employee experience. They haven't taken those same principles and deployed them inside of their own enterprises. So essentially things that as simple as knowledge management that we're deploying for mid-market organizations, they're finding extremely valuable. So when I talk about knowledge management, I'll give you an example. So if you've ever worked in the enterprise space, mid-market space for any of your listeners, they probably have used some sort of knowledge management tool, right? Whether it was specific to a department like sales enablement or just something like a SharePoint portal, right? And everyone could sort of have their own horror stories of how excruciating it is to just access data inside their own company. So essentially what we could do is we could build a chatbot layer on top of existing knowledge bases to extract that information much more rapidly in a way that is easy for the end user. So even simple use cases like that are seeing tremendous value gain. And then also you can begin to think of existing workflows within an organization and adding a layer of automation on top of it, and then essentially similarly surfacing that with a chatbot, finding a lot of traction in that area.
Because can you maybe share a more practical example? Like what would one employee do with a knowledge management bot?
Yeah, I'll give a specific example. So essentially we are working with a mid-market organization.
Okay.
They were multinational, so they had locations distributed within the United States, within Asia, within Europe. And essentially what they were finding is that in some of their contracts with their customers, they're only allowed to work with a very, very specific organization based upon non-competes. So essentially they worked with one of the largest retailers in the United States. And unfortunately, their business executives in Singapore couldn't contact the United States in time. So they actually ended up signing a contract with a competing retailer, right? And that was entirely a result of a lack of communication due to knowledge management. So essentially what we've done is we built a knowledge management tool where these executives in different regions don't have to reach out and wait, days or weeks to get this information. They could get it readily on demand, so they can essentially ensure there's no missed business opportunities.
Wow, very powerful example here. And what are you seeing in, like, what's the impact of COVID-19 in the conversational AI space overall?
Yeah, so there's two trends. I think the first trend is one that's really reassuring. I think for the first time, we're really seeing the conversational AI community sort of band together and build bots, and, really take it from the approach of, trying to create value for people in a time of need. And that's something that I've sort of seen across the board, which has been very inspiring. So number one, it's seeing the community really come together and drive really beneficial efforts. And number two, we're actually beginning to see sort of a higher adoption of messaging channels, unsurprising as a result of quarantines. I think Microsoft Teams for the first time has essentially hit, some of the highest monthly active users to date. So what I've been hearing actually is that, number one, companies that already had Microsoft Teams on their roadmap to essentially adopt it, those timetables have been expedited. So more organizations are adopting these things quicker. Number two, for companies that already had Microsoft Teams, companies that were already evaluating some sort of chatbot integration, those projects also have been expedited. So we're actually seeing an increased demand of not only internal messaging channels, but also those bots that would sort of enable extended business functionality.
Wow, that would mean like huge business for you guys, I imagine here.
Yeah, we're certainly getting a lot more people reaching out at this point. So there's a lot more traction that's occurring. But at the same time, it's really unfortunate circumstances. So, whatever, I think similar to what you guys have done, sort of supporting the COVID effort, whatever we can sort of do to really make an impact, I think is really pertinent at this time.
Yeah, I saw you guys were also kind of contributing and helping some non-profit organization to kind of spreading the information and helping out, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've actually deployed two separate instances. One is a chatbot that sort of just provides information. It provides very simple sort of symptoms checker. And then there's this follow-up process so we could sort of evaluate data over time. And then we've also developed sort of a different project, not chatbot based, but one where people could sort of share their support with people around the world. So yeah, I appreciate you.
Human to human instead of human to bot. Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting. Maybe some final point here. Could you share a contrarian opinion you have about the future of conversational AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is a tendency by pretty much anyone in any new emerging technology to begin to have this certain myopic view sometimes of like how we sort of look at the technology and our expectations of the experiences. So essentially what I mean is I think that we shouldn't try and force total use cases or so we should sort of step back from looking at the interfaces or the modalities, right? Whether that be voice, whether that be chatbots, and not try to force everything on one specific modality. Because I think what we have to see is that chatbots and voice are not a panacea for every single customer touch point on the customer journey and not every single use case. So I think what we're going to begin to see in the future, and I think this is not anything new, but it's thinking about what is the fourth industrial revolution and really what is the future state of ambient computing. And what that looks like is this really decoupled environment where we are potentially using multiple interfaces because essentially if we think about each interface individually, each interface has a pro and a con in regards to what can be successfully executed on that one single interface at that point. For example, if we think about voice, right? Voice, for example, is not the greatest in giving me back long form structured data, right? It's good at sort of inputting simple requests. But if I say, Alexa, tell me, what my previous purchases for the month of January were. And it's reading this huge list off of structured data. That's not a really good use case for that channel. But
Exactly.
if we think about a visual channel, potentially like a chatbot, or even just a web interface, now with both of those things in conjunction, we have a really good experience. So I think what the future lies is thinking about how we can integrate multiple different interfaces at the same time, essentially balancing the pros and cons. Because if you can leverage multiple interfaces, you could effectively smooth out the overarching user experience by sort of taking the best attributes from each interface. And that's what I sort of see the future sort of actually morphing into. It's just a matter of like, if we are thinking about that today, so we could position ourselves for tomorrow.
Wow, this is a very interesting topic here. It kind of resonates well with the concept of place owner, where like depending on which place you are based in, maybe you are in the library, so you couldn't speak, so you are more relying on the visual part. But if you are on the street or running, then you can your hand might be tied, so you must rely more on voice. This kind of technology should be really combining and morphing to the context of the user, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the most evident cases that we see today is, everyone talks about voice commerce, right? And no one can solve it, right? But I think the way to think about it is
people really buy things with voice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I saw on Singles Day with Alibaba, I think there was like this huge number of things that were purchased, right? But I think the thing to look into is the fact of what is the complexity of every type of purchase, right? And I think what we saw predominantly on Singles Day was that the things that were purchased were sort of food products, rice, eggs, essentially commoditized staple products. Right. So I think buying those type of things is readily accessible just over voice itself. We see some similar trends in the United States, probably not to that same degree. But I think the notion should be, if I want to buy a pair of jeans, that's almost impossible to do over just voice because the amount of variation and attributes is so much higher than something like buying eggs or rice. So I think if they were just to focus more attention towards a multimodality experience, they already have the Alexa app, right? Why can't I not say, I would like to get a pair of, black jeans, and then it would tell me, okay, cool. Take a look at these black jeans here. Okay, now that's a pretty good experience, right? That's not Jarvis, right? If we think about Iron Man. So I think the maturity model should be something like, optimize essentially the infrastructure and ecosystem that exists today, right? I think we all have this idealized vision that we could talk to an assistant and it's very robust, right? It's multi-turn conversation. It handles context. It handles a sense of understanding, but essentially that's not where the technology is today. Now you could build something from scratch, but that would take a very, very long time to do so. So it's optimized with what you have today, essentially.
Perfect. So that closes really well the anti-podcast of today. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.